I got nothing to say.
Initiated in the 80s, differences and irreconcilable. Okay, dog.
The red pill industry has taken a massive hit this year. From Andrew Tate's calculated silence in order to not get thrown back into Romanian prison, to the demonetization of fresh and fit, fewer and fewer guys are consuming women bad, men good rage porn. Because honestly, how many times can you hear these questions?
Why body count matters. Can you present to me convincing arguments why I or other men should get married?
Now, while I would argue that 90% of red pill is cringe and just straight up factually incorrect, is there a possibility that, like any cult, it has a few golden nuggets that can improve your life? Or was this whole thing set up from the get-go to exploit your insecurities in order to sell courses?
Hustlers University.
Hustlers University.
In the real world.
Hustlers University.
Hustlers University.
Joining me to answer this question is Alex Villanchin, the owner of arguably one of the most well-known men's dating channels and frequent critic of Fresh and Fit and Rollo Tomasi. Alex, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, man. Glad to be here.
My first question that I want to start with is, red pill set up to profit by exploiting male insecurity, or doesn't actually serve a valid purpose?
I think it's mostly set up to profit from male insecurity and male anger and resentment. Of course, there is a purpose. It's pushback on feminism, right? But there's a better way to push back on feminism than to go to the other extreme. It's like pushback, you can go from like, someone who's liberal to a far right, right? You have these massive swings. The truth is typically somewhere in the middle. So to kind of outline why I think it's set up to profit on male insecurity is because it's a lot of rage porn, really. There's some channels that are literally just straight up, dumb bimbo, doesn't know what she's talking about. Like, it's all just rage bait. It's not even clickbait. I think rage bait is a more appropriate term. And then when you look at some of these channels like Fresh and Fit, for example, who say like, oh, our main goal is to help men. We're not about the money. And they have like 20 million different schemes. Like, they have like 4 different products they sell that cost like $500 a pop. In order to watch the show from backstage, you have to pay like $1,000. All their events you have to pay to get in. They have like for Patreon you have to pay. For locals only you have to pay. They make tens of thousands of dollars from super chats. They only read questions. They're super chatted. They'll typically go, okay, we're doing 100 and up now. So the whole thing is designed to make as much money as possible for these red pill content creators. But, that's not to say they don't have elements of truth in what they say. It's just, yeah. So those two, I don't see those as mutually exclusive. But I think the main goal for the majority, I don't want to say all, but for the majority of red pill content creators, just like I think a lot of people in a lot of industries, is to make as much money as possible.
Well, you kind of spoke about the spectrum, and in my mind, red pill tenets seem to exist on a spectrum. And I'm curious, what are some beliefs that you consider to be like more out there? And what, if any, beliefs do you consider to be like real golden nuggets that guys can apply to their everyday life without sort of participating in rage porn?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start off with a thing that's nonsense. So, one of the big talking points red pillers say is like, oh, we're just going off the science. We're just going off the science. But when you actually look at the science and the studies, that couldn't be further from the truth for a lot of these talking points. I'll just quickly run through like the 3 big ones. There's a saying that they say, and this is pretty much dogma in the red pill community, nowadays 10% of girls are having sex with 90% of the men. That's just science. Nowadays 10% of men are having sex with 90% of the women. It would be pretty cool if it was the other way around. Yeah. But in reality, when you actually look at the study, it's about 20% of men having about 50 to 60% of the sex, and that number has been constant for decades. So it seems like for the last 50 years or so, there's been, a smaller number of men that's been pretty good with women, or at least in a better situation, and that number is not going up or down, staying about the same. And again, it's not as extreme as to make it sound. It's 20% to 50, 60% of the sex. Here's one that I actually fell for myself up until I actually looked at the studies. So it's male virginity is a massive epidemic that's on the rise, right? And there's a scary graph that I think everyone's seen that shows in 2008, only 8% of men under 30 were virgins. Now it's 27%. When you look at that graph, the only obvious conclusion is that, like, holy shit, what the fuck is going on here? But when you actually look into this closer, you look at the actual study, you break it down by age, you find a totally different picture. So when you actually look at the numbers, guys 18 to 20, 50% of them are virgins. Now, when you go up to 22 to 30, literally just make that small jump, it's only 7.85%. When you go 25 to 30, it's 1.9%. So this seems to be much less of like, things are getting worse for men, and much more of like, hey, men are having sex later on in life. And if you think about it logically, it makes sense because guys are taking longer to mature. Guys are living with their parents more. Typically, like 30, 40 years ago, by the time you were, 18, 19, you had a job, or you had a serious relationship or you were married, right? Now people are getting married later on in life. They're taking more time to mature, especially men. So yeah, that's a big myth. And the last one that I'll just throw in there is women becoming more and more promiscuous, right? You hear this talking point all the time. There's a small element of truth there. But it's largely BS. It's only 5% of the most sexually active women that are becoming more and more promiscuous. So essentially, the super DTF girls from 30 years ago are becoming even more DTF today, right? But when you look at like actual 95% of women, they're actually having equal to even potentially a little bit less of sex than Gen X or boomers, right? So the vast majority of women are not having more sex. It's only about 5% that are becoming more and more promiscuous. So those are, I think, three big red pill dogmas that can easily be refuted if you actually look at the studies. And also, I wrote a whole article on this, so if anyone wants to check my sources, feel free. I cite all of them there. But in terms of things that the red pill is correct about, I mean, obviously, they're correct when they say there's a difference between men and women. Men and women think and operate differently. The whole feminist talking point that men and women are the same is cringe. And there are, of course, differences even when it comes to men and women's brains, right? It's not all just physical differences. Typically, men, I forget the technical term for that part of the brain, but there's women have much more evolved part of their brain that allows for social things, which is typically why you see in HR, for example, it's dominated by women, right? Because women are typically better at social things, right? Women are typically much more socially astute and much more socially competent than men, like on average, right? Versus men are typically better at logical things or analytical things, which is why you see math and engineering dominated by men. And that's not because of some kind of sexism. That's just simply because we gravitate, generally speaking, to different things. Of course, there's exceptions. So yeah, I mean, there's obviously multiple things that, they're correct about. I think they're correct about the idea that marriage as is in 2024 in America is not a good bargain for men. I agree with that. I personally don't ever plan on getting married. I think they agree that women are, less feminine and less traditional than they were like 30, 40 years ago on average. But then also I think they take it too far when they basically imply that in order to get a good girl, you have to go overseas to Eastern Europe. Like, no, there's great women in America. There's plenty of them. I'm dating one. I've met many. But yeah, so that's kind of a rough breakdown of, what they're right and wrong about.
So I have to admit myself, I definitely thought that the study with 27% of men being sexless under the age of 30 or whatever it was that you mentioned a few minutes ago was correct as well. I think I've even seen that pop up on Chris Williamson's podcast a number of times. And you kind of say that you've gone through the studies and you're providing what seems to be a much more nuanced take than I think is generally presented online. Why do you find yourself actually going and seeking out these studies and reading them yourself? Because one would think you kind of working in the dating industry, it would be to your benefit to simply interpret these studies in the same way most people are. So why are you actually going out of your way to take a look at what the data says?
Yeah, for sure. So just to quickly comment on what you said earlier, I literally fell for it myself. It's not like that number is a lie. It's correct. It just kind of deceptively creates a perception that's not really there. It doesn't actually, no one who breaks down that study actually shows you the age by age breakdown, right? It's just it's like 8% to 27%. So I fell for that myself. The reason I do it is largely because I debate a lot of red pillars. And so, when they say to me oh, this is just what the science says, I want to be able to actually refute that instead of saying, well, I don't really think that's what it is. I want to be able to actually cite a number in a study. That's why I do it. Yeah, you're probably right. It would be more mutually, it would be more advantageous of me to just kind of go along with that. Look, everyone's being a virgin, you guys gotta, get my dating services. But, I'm doing financially well enough. I don't need to lie or deceive my audience. And honestly, I find that just by being honest, even though short term you could lose your money, long term it's a better strategy because your audience likes, trusts, and respects you more. And that means they tell their friend. And ultimately, you will have a much more solid community, even that causes you short-term loss in terms of money.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the idea of likely not getting married moving forward. And I think this is something that I've noticed in a lot of my friends who live inside of cities. But then I speak to a lot of my friends who live in smaller towns, have traditionally done so throughout the majority of their lives. And there's much more focus on the idea of getting married, especially inside of smaller communities that are religious. And I'm curious, you live in Miami. Do you think living in Miami has led to that general life plan for you? Or is this something that you've always felt, and why?
Yeah, so I've actually moved around a lot throughout my life. I was born in Belarus. I grew up in New Jersey, went to school in Boston. I lived in LA, then lived in Texas, lived in New Zealand, and now I'm living in Miami for the last 6 years. Of course, I do think that, where, I spend most of my life, my beliefs have been pretty constant for the last, I think 7 or 8 years before I even moved to Miami. But of course, I think, where I was and the experience I had definitely shaped me. It's entirely possible that if I grew up in some small town, I would have married my high school sweetheart and never even thought about any of this stuff, right? And there's definitely a difference between small religious communities and large cities. And also there's a difference between a city like Miami, which is very nightlife, Riz and glam oriented, compared to a city like, let's say Albuquerque, New Mexico or something like that, right? Which is going to have different values. But yeah, I do think it's played a role for sure. But I can't really quantify how much of a role it's been because, yeah, it's not like I can, but I can envision it playing a role in my beliefs. Although I would like to think, that the beliefs I have are grounded in some combination of studies and real experience. Yes, anecdotal experience can always be biased. I do try to also not only look at my experiences, but the experiences of other people before I make conclusions. So, for example, when it comes to politics, I think most people either watch liberal or conservative shit. I watch both liberal and conservative, even though I'm more on the liberal spectrum, because I want to hear the other perspective. I watch Valuetainment. I watch even Ben Shapiro because I want to see what the other's perspective is. So I try to do that when it comes to this stuff, but obviously I'm not perfect.
What's the reasoning behind you not wanting to get married?
Well, I don't see a point in it. So I'm in a relationship right now, happy relationship that's going on for 4 years. We love each other. We spend a lot of time together. But unless I was to have a kid, I don't see the point in marriage. It doesn't benefit me in any way. And I'm in a unique situation where my girlfriend also makes a lot of money. So unlike a lot of couples where the guy's making more than the girl, it's sort of even. I make a little bit more than her, but it's not super substantial. But even then, it just doesn't benefit me in any way to get married. I don't see what's the point of involving the government in our relationship. And then I find that when you get married, you're more likely to stay together despite, hating each other than if you're not, because it's a whole headache. Now, I think the one exception is if you're having children, in which case being married is probably a good thing, right? So if I ever do have kids, I probably will get married. But at this point in time, I don't have any kids. I don't have any immediate plans to have kids. So it seems like it's something that's not going to benefit me in any way.
I would generally agree in terms of just living one's life if you're not going to be having kids in the future, especially if both partners are making similar amounts of money and one person isn't kind of finding themselves in a position where they have to be dependent on the other person. There isn't a lot of value to actually involve the government in your personal life and get married and just simply to have it official on paper. But I guess my follow-up question is this: do you think that there's any value in terms of social cohesion and what we pass on to the next generation? And this is even in the context of you not having children, but just participating in something like a cultural meme, let's say, in order to provide an example to the next generation of hey, this is a useful way to keep society together statistically.
Yeah, well, I do think that, that marriage does go a long way. I mean, I guess the counterpoint is we've never really tried the opposite in the last, several thousand years. It's always been you get married, you have a few kids. We've never really had society where unless you go to prehistoric times where people were just not doing that. But I do think, I do think there's a lot of value in, having a family unit where the parents are both there for the kids. Obviously, we could see that even from a scientific perspective, that kids who have both parents on average do a lot better than kids who have one parent. So there's definitely value in that when it comes to raising a family. But again, I wouldn't just because, like, for example, I think there's a lot of benefit to people who, volunteer for the military, right? That's good for a country, but it's not something I'm going to do just because it's something that's good for the country. It's good for the country if there's a lot of tax money coming in, but I'm not going to pay more in taxes just to do that. So it's kind of like the same thing here. That's not to say I will never have kids. It's something that's on my mind. It might happen in 5 or 10 years. And if I do, I definitely would like to get married. But so I do think there's value in it from an overall, macro perspective. But the macro doesn't always affect the micro.
So as stated at the beginning of the interview, your channel focuses a lot on how to teach men how to get more dates, whether that's through Tinder, cold approach. As of late, it's moved more into the realm of live debates. However, when it comes to dating, in your mind, what's the best method for guys to get dates? Is it Tinder? Is it cold approach? Is it lifestyle design? What do you think?
I feel like they're all very synergistic, and to pick one is limiting yourself. So this is like a big debate that happens in my community a lot. Is dating apps better than cold approach? And it's like, they're so synergistic. It's like, you should do both. You should build up your lifestyle. You should develop a social circle. You should get out there on dating apps and give it a shot. You should learn how to talk to girls in real life. All those things work really well together. Cold approach pushes you way outside your comfort zone. The dating apps just don't, right? So you become more confident. You become much better taking rejection. You become much more grounded. All great things. Online dating is a little bit more, significantly more efficient, right? Because any girl you're talking to is a girl who's already swiped right on you, and she at the very least finds you attractive, and she's single, right? Or, single enough to meet up with a random guy from a dating app. And I think social circle, provides a different value. I think, you can probably potentially meet the highest quality and most attractive girls from social circle cold approach, I think, but mostly social circle. I think it's a lot easier, like, once you get it, like, really set up. Like, for example, looking at, like, Michael Sartain, right? Like, that dude doesn't, have to cold approach. He doesn't need to use dating apps. He has created a lifestyle where he's surrounded by a lot of very attractive girls. Now, I think a Michael Sartain type of life is not practical for the majority of men, but you can have some semblance of that. So yeah, my answer is that I just think they're all good in their own regards, and I think that guys should try to incorporate all of those into their life.
You have one of the most hilarious and honestly somewhat insightful videos on your channel that I've come across of all time. And it was actually all the way back in 2020 that I was exposed to your brand as a result of this video. Let's quickly take a look at it.
We're going to show you what do you do when you have a girl back at your place, make sexy time happen. Ooh. And I'm push the hair back a little bit. Touch. What does this one mean? Keep a lot of sexual tension, so just like this. Like, physically move her.
All right, man. So this is absolute art from a meme perspective, but it also provides some good tips for guys who are super inexperienced. I remember being in a period of life where I was coming out of a 4.5-year relationship / marriage. And prior to that, I had dated a girl for 5 years. So I had essentially been monogamous for a good 10 years. And even though I came across this, and at the time I was sort of cringing inside, there was some sort of educational element that has honestly, in some ways, influenced the way that I actually interact with people when I'm sort of physically escalating on dates to this day. So I guess my question is, how do you approach, as a content creator, creating content when you're essentially trying to educate but also entertain in equal measure? And how does your approach potentially tie into what we're talking about earlier in terms of treading the fine line between creating provocative content to make sales while also delivering value that ideally helps people?
For sure. Yeah. So the funny thing about that video is it was purely spontaneous. It wasn't like a pre-planned thing at all. It was a girl that I was hooking up with at the time. It's like 2019, 2020, so like 4 or 5 years ago. And we just shot this video just, for shits and giggles. And then I was like undecided about whether I should even put it on YouTube or not, because I'm like, I don't know. It seems kind of unprofessional. I give her like a wet willy at the head. And then I sent it to a few of my friends. I'm like, no, dude, you got to put it up. And it's ironic that became my most popular video. So yeah, it is. And yeah, I do agree with you. It's got, elements of humor. And also I think it does give a good practical advice on what you do when you're sitting with a girl on a bed or on a couch. What should you do? It's like, to me, that question is easily like, I know the answer to that, but I get a lot of guys saying, hey, girl's back at my place. What do? I don't know what to do. Right. And, some guys will sit around for 2 hours not doing anything. The girl gets bored and leave. There's one funny story about this guy. You can't even make this stuff up. So when he would bring the girl back to his place, the first thing he would do is take all his clothes off and put on a condom. And he was surprised why every girl was walking away. And it's like, dude, you got to do a little bit more than that before you whip it out and start using protection. But I never make content for the sake of being provocative. I make content that I personally find interesting and that I would personally be proud of. Sometimes it definitely lean on much more of the informational side. Sometimes it's much more on the entertainment side. Like I'll sometimes do parodies and stuff. Like we did a parody where, the whole Fresh and Fit break-in, where we did a parody of that, where my friend broke in. He was wearing like a jihad, whatever outfit. And it was like a water gun that I had. So sometimes I'll just do content purely for fun, but it's never just to try to be provocative. It's actually a expression of like kind of how my brain works and just my personality. I think one of the things that I've heard a lot from people is like, oh, you're kind of exactly the same way you are on the internet. It's like, that's actually my personality. I'm fairly polite. I'm fairly chill and relaxed, but also have I would say, an edgy sense of humor that can be dark at times. You also have like kind of, I don't give a fuck attitude. Well, I'll just say whatever comes to my mind. I'm also fairly creative, so that's basically the video is just essentially an expression of what I believe, what I'm proud of, and of course, what my audience wants to see. That's also a huge part of it. I definitely try to, at least I pride myself on really taking feedback of my audience in account. So I'll constantly do these community posts like, hey, what video do you guys want to see next? I have a whole form people can submit in terms of content requests. And I would say at this point, about 50% of the videos I make are videos that have been directly requested by my audience. So yeah, it's a combination of those two things. Again, what my audience wants to see and what, I want to do. But even if my audience wants to see something that is not genuine to me, I won't do it. Like if they want to see, okay, Alex, can you show why, the red pill is, or can you do it? Okay, here's a common one. Alex, it'd be really cool to watch you do a podcast where you like kick a girl out like Fresh and Fit. Like, I'm not going to do that unless obviously the girl does something really crazy. Like, I'm just not going to do that. It's not like what I believe in is being rude to guests. So yeah, I generally try to keep it authentic. And that's what I think my audience likes and respects, I would say. I don't know.
Well, as our last question, and it's sort of a two-part question. If people want to find you online, where do they do it? Number one. And number two, if someone's thinking about bringing on a dating coach in their own life, what is a red flag that shows that person is likely not the person that they want to work with?
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question. So where can people find me? Just go on YouTube, type in Playing with Fire, and that's me. Or you can search Alex from Playing with Fire. You can search Tinder, texting, all those keywords I rank pretty high on. So yeah, just check out my YouTube channel. I have a website where if you prefer reading things instead of watching them, where I do articles of my most popular videos. In those articles, I'll typically go more in depth and like citing the actual research and studies. So if you're more into that, check out the website. If you want to see like proof of concept, I have a whole thing where I just break down my layer reports, where I show all the screenshots from start to finish, blah, blah. In terms of red flags for a dating coach, that's a good question. I would say, number one, if you look at that person and you're thinking there's no way that guy's ever getting laid, like someone like, you can bleep this out if you don't want me to name drop, but it's Coach Corey Wayne. You look at that dude and you're like, there's no fucking way this guy has any success with women. Number two, if there's absolutely no proof of concept at all. Now, look, I don't think a dating coach should be like, it needs to be like sharing like, porn videos or like nudes or whatever. But, if you've never seen them with a girl, then it's a potential red flag. If they have no proof of concept, that's a red flag. I think that's one. I think that also what their level of respect in the industry is. Now, for sure, the dating industry is very tribal and fragmented. But, I think the coaches that are respected, they have a lot of other coaches who will endorse them. And the coaches who are, BS probably don't really have anyone else endorsing them. So I think that's also something I would take into account. I would also look at, for example, how they interact with women. I think that there should be, any dating coach should have some type of content that shows him interacting with a girl, right? I think if someone's just talking, but there's no like actual demonstration, that's a red flag. Like, for example, on my channel, you'll find videos of me actually like cold approaching girls in real life. You'll watch interviews of me flirting with girls. You can watch me do speed dates. You can watch me interact with my girlfriend. You can watch me interact with many other girls. So you can see multiple proof of concepts. So yeah, I would say those are the big things. So if you see someone who has no proof of concept, you never see them interacting with a girl, you look at them and they're like, there's no way this guy gets laid. Although that one can be a little tricky because you might be biased because you're like, oh, this guy's, whatever, Indian, and there's no way. So that one, I would say take it with a grain of salt. And also, if no one in the industry respects them, I would say those are the big things. But really the biggest one, honestly, is proof of concept. Really just, is there a video of this guy talking to a girl? And there should be more than one. There's some dating coaches who literally just have like one video from 5 years ago, them talking to one girl and they do well. And that's to me is not sufficient, It's like a personal trainer who has one success story. It's like, yeah, I'm probably not going to hire that guy. Probably going to hire the guy with 50 success stories.
Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It was a lot of fun.